Luigi thanks everybody for being here today.
Luigi Mangione, the young man that police say shot and killed the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, is facing charges in multiple jurisdictions that could land him behind bars for life or even on death row. And today, he appeared in New York State Court where he faces 10 charges, including murder and criminal possession of a weapon. We're going to take a look at what happened inside and outside of that courtroom, as well as how we got here and what's next. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It's been 8 weeks since we last saw Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old accused of stalking UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson outside of the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan on December 4th of last year, as Thompson was headed to an investors conference scheduled for later that morning. And that is when Luigi Mangione, according to authorities, allegedly murdered him. And authorities say that Mangione is the hooded figure who shot Thompson in the back on that sidewalk that is normally bustling with people. He allegedly took off, eventually using an e-bike, a taxi, a bus to flee New York City. Shortly after the killing, the NYPD released surveillance images of a man believed to be the shooter. The police released images that were captured inside of a Starbucks. He was seen with a mask on, obscuring his face. Presuming it's the same person, he was also captured without the mask on, smiling in surveillance from the hostel he was reportedly staying at. And then there are other images from outside the crime scene, allegedly showing a man carrying a concealed firearm, acting suspiciously. We have another image of the suspect captured from inside a cab where he can once again be seen wearing a mask over his face. And Luigi Mangione was arrested in Pennsylvania at a McDonald's, of all places, out in Altoona after a week-long manhunt. Although it's kind of mixed reporting on that, our understanding it was an employee who reported that this man seen on all the wanted posters and dominating news headlines was in the restaurant. Not sure the involvement of a customer there, but once Mangione was captured, that's when police found some interesting things, like a ghost gun and journal entries that apparently he had with him. And if you read through these writings, it seemingly points to an anger at the healthcare industry, talking about how they're uncaring and corrupt. Now, this is a story that shocked the country. It led to some very interesting discourse, as well as an intense interest in Mangione's background. And in fact, Law&Crime Productions just released a documentary called Who is Luigi Mangione on Investigation Discovery. You can actually stream it right now on Max. And it digs into his life, the apparent detour that he took from valedictorian at an elite private school to now accused killer. And by the way, it seems that that documentary has just been brought up in court for Mangione's most recent court appearance today. I'll get into that in a second. So, Mangione has been locked up in the Metropolitan Detention Center out in Brooklyn since his arrest, the MDC. That's where also Sean Combs is currently being housed. It was quite the scene. He was escorted by what looked like an army of police officers. Even Mayor Eric Adams was there, all taking him to the courthouse. And right now, Luigi Mangione is the defendant in 3 separate cases connected to the death of Brian Thompson. You have a state case in Pennsylvania, a state case in New York, and a federal case in New York. And I'll dig into the progress of each case in a moment, but just talking about what happened at the beginning, Mangione, he had his first appearance in New York State Court, entered a not guilty plea just before Christmas in December, and today he appeared again at the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse, where he faces a long list of charges. First-degree murder as an act of terrorism, second-degree murder as an act of terrorism, second-degree murder, an intentional killing, possession of a forged instrument, criminal possession of a weapon silencer, 2 criminal possessions of a weapon charges for loaded firearms, criminal possession of a weapon assault rifle, criminal possession of a weapon ammo clip, criminal possession of a weapon ghost gun. And in fact, under New York state law, murder in the first degree only applies to a narrow list of aggravating circumstances, and one of those is an act of terrorism. By the way, I got to call something out here. The stories that we cover on Sidebar, I think, highlight just how crucial it is to protect yourself, particularly online, by the way, these days. And that is especially true when it comes to protecting your personal information. So whether it's spam, identity theft, online stalking, our amazing sponsor, Surfshark, offers an incredible solution to these issues with their alternative number feature. So this service, which is built right into the Surfshark app, it lets you create an entirely new identity, complete with a random US phone number, email, name. This way, you can keep your real number and details completely private. It is great for signing up for services or websites that maybe you don't fully trust, ensuring your personal phone number stays free from spam. Also, with alternative number, you don't have to give your real phone number to strangers while shopping on various marketplaces. So if you're ready to take your online privacy to that next level, check out Surfshark in the description below or visit surfshark.com/alt-sidebar. Sign up now and get Surfshark's alternative number feature plus 4 extra months of Surfshark. So now with all that, let's get into what happened today in New York State Court as he faces those state charges. So CNN reported that there were dozens of apparent supporters outside that courtroom, some with signs that read, "Free Luigi" and "Healthcare is a human right," some even wearing Free Luigi clothing. In fact, The Independent reported that there was cheering going on. According to the New York Times, about 100 young women just line the hallway in that courthouse. So Mangione shows up wearing this green sweater and also what appears to be some sort of vest, possibly a bulletproof vest. He is escorted by a ton of security personnel, and then he's taken into the courtroom and there's a hearing. Now, to be clear, there's no cameras in that courtroom. There's no audio recording in that courtroom. So everything that we learned about what happened there is based on reporting from different outlets. So, for example, the first issue facing Luigi Mangione was the fact that he was cuffed as he was in that courtroom. According to the BBC, Mangione's counsel, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, argued that he shouldn't be restrained, saying, quote, "This is a highly publicized and photographed court proceeding with strong public interest," and that him being cuffed implies that there is, quote, "no presumption of innocence for him." And she also reportedly emphasized that he is a model prisoner, that there hasn't been an issue. She argued that he is being treated differently, that he shouldn't have to wear these restraints, and obviously a defense attorney wouldn't want that because as these images are being publicized and being published, could it negatively affect his ability to get a fair and impartial jury down the road if you have potential jury members who see these photos, right? Now, the judge indicated that security preferred for him to be restrained, so the cuffs stayed on. And that's not surprising because many times judges will defer to security personnel within the courtroom in the courthouse about what's best. But moving on, Friedman-Agnifilo then indicated that the defense hadn't received the bulk of discovery yet, allegedly past the discovery deadline. And she said this included New York police reports and even seemingly made an allegation that evidence may be deliberately being withheld, and also that his constitutional search and seizure rights may have been violated out in Pennsylvania. It was reported by The Independent that prosecutors, though, had turned over police body cam footage, DNA, forensic testing material, the autopsy report, grand jury testimony. But Agnifilo also objected to setting a schedule for motions because of the multiple cases that he faces, and really emphasizing that the feds haven't indicated if they're even seeking the death penalty yet in their case, and that a motion schedule shouldn't be set yet. Agnifilo reportedly saying, "That is where our focus is. That's why the discovery is so critical to what we can put in our motions." And she also reportedly seemed to argue that the theories of the federal and state prosecutions are inconsistent with one another. And then, as I mentioned before, Friedman-Agnifilo seemed to bring up that documentary that I mentioned before. Again, the one that Law&Crime Productions produced. And the reason she brought it up was seemingly in reference to whether Mangione is going to receive a fair trial. She complained about how the NYPD chief of detectives and the New York City mayor, Eric Adams, quote, "sat down with HBO and put hair and makeup on." And the argument was they allegedly have time to do that, but at the same time, she and the defense team are not getting the material and evidence that they need. And she even makes the claim that there were things brought up in that documentary, evidence, material, that she's never seen. Now, according to People, Friedman-Agnifilo also apparently complained that actors playing Mangione on TV didn't sound anything like him. Maybe that was a reference to the documentary. Maybe it was a reference to something else, not entirely clear. But this goes to her overall argument that his right to a fair trial is, quote, "continuously being impacted." Those appear to be Karen Friedman-Agnifilo's words there. Now, according to Inner City Press on X, the judge did set a motion schedule where the defense has to have their paperwork in by April 9th, the prosecution in by May 14th. The next hearing is going to be set for June. No trial date has been set as of yet, and he apparently will remain in federal custody, presumably at the MDC. And I'll tell you what, after that hearing, Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, outside of court, had some words.
Luigi Mangione remains in federal custody, where he is being prosecuted in 3 jurisdictions by the federal government, by New York State and by Altoona, Pennsylvania, but he's being held in federal custody, and the Department of Justice has refused to allow him to be in state custody, despite the fact that they've all agreed that the state court is going to go first. Now, this is problematic for several reasons. Number one, the federal government is still considering whether to execute Luigi and considering whether to seek the death penalty. So we are fighting that simultaneously while going first here in state court. And it impacts our ability to meet with him before court, after court. He's constantly surrounded by law enforcement. He's in shackles. He was wearing a vest today, looked like I don't even know what it looked like, but a very serious vest with his legs shackled and his arms shackled. And so he's being treated differently because he's being held in federal custody than any other person who would be facing serious murder one charges in New York State court. And I made a record in court today that I don't understand what this show of danger is for. When I go visit Luigi at MDC in Brooklyn, I sit with him. He is unshackled. He walks around freely in the visiting area. We sit in a room together without law enforcement hovering over us. But for whatever reason, here, despite all the law enforcement, they need him to be wearing this vest. They need him to be shackled, and they stand right over us, and we get no time with him. So he is being treated differently because of this unusual and, frankly, just the fact that he's being prosecuted by 3 jurisdictions for one event. It all is about one thing, one single event.
Freeman Agnifilo also said that while the prosecutors are making an effort to get discovery to them, there's still a lot of important information they're missing.
But what we haven't received is the police paperwork from New York City. We haven't received any of, they call them DD5s. Those are the follow-up police reports that detectives write. I am sure there will be hundreds of them, and we have not received those yet. Very important. We've also just today received the discovery regarding the arrest in the Altoona case, and we've received a little of that previously, and we are concerned that Luigi's constitutional rights were violated in Pennsylvania, and there are serious search and seizure issues that will be litigated in that case in Pennsylvania and in this case here and in the federal case, because it is alleged that Luigi had a gun on him and had other property on him that they are going to use against him in all of the cases. And if there is a search and seizure issue, and again, we have to review all of the paperwork and camera footage when we receive it before we say definitively whether we think there is one. But so far what we are seeing is we think there is a serious search and seizure issue. Luigi's right to a fair trial is being infringed upon because he is being publicly treated as guilty and as having the presumption of guilt as opposed to the presumption of innocence, which is what he is entitled to. And although, of course, I understand the NYPD's need for a press conference before an arrest or after an arrest, which they did here. I didn't like it, but they did it, and I understood it. What I did not understand was how shocking it was that this week on HBO, in a documentary, I see the chief of detectives and the New York City mayor, full hair and makeup done, sitting down and giving an interview for television and talking about the evidence in Luigi's case, talking about police paperwork that we don't have, talking about forensics that we have not yet received. I guess we have now today, but I didn't when I was sitting there learning about the case, hearing an actor play Luigi reading from a journal that they say is Luigi's, and we have yet to receive it from the prosecution. And so it's outrageous that they have time to go and prejudice Mr. Mangione's ability to receive a fair trial and go out and make these statements, but not give this to us. And so we are concerned because if the chief of detectives is telling everybody about all this evidence, and what if it ultimately gets suppressed because it was an illegal search and seizure in Altoona, Pennsylvania, how is he going to get a fair trial?
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about Mangione generally and what we know about his federal case. Let's talk about that. So he is facing serious charges in federal court and could end up facing the death penalty if he's convicted. While Mangione has been indicted in the state case, an indictment hasn't been filed as of yet in his federal case, but a criminal complaint was filed with the court in December, laying out what the government says has happened step by step. So there are multiple charges in this federal complaint. You have stalking, travel and interstate commerce, basically that he allegedly traveled to New York and then stalked Brian Thompson. Stalking, use of interstate facilities, that he used cell phone, interstate wires, the internet to stalk and ultimately kill Brian Thompson. Murder through use of a firearm. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And then a firearms offense where he possessed, brandished, discharged a firearm that was equipped with a firearm silencer and a muffler. Now, earlier this month, the Honorable Catherine H. Parker of the Southern District of New York granted a continuance around the same time that another attorney was added to the defense team. And the court filing states it is further found that given the nature of the prosecution and the complexity of the case, the government and defense counsel, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, Mark Agnifilo, who's, by the way, her husband and representing Sean Combs in his criminal case, and Avraham Moskowitz, Esquire, have jointly requested a continuance of 30 days to permit both parties adequate preparation for pretrial proceedings and the trial itself, and that the defendant, through counsel, has consented that such a continuance may be granted for that purpose. It is further found that the granting of such a continuance best serves the ends of justice and outweighs the best interests of the public and the defendant in a speedy trial, and therefore it is ordered that the request for a continuance is hereby granted until March 19th, 2025. Now, at the beginning of February, Judge Parker granted an application from the Federal Defenders of New York to name a new member of Mangione's defense team. The application reads, I recommend the appointment of Avraham Moskowitz as learned counsel. Mr. Moskowitz is a member of the SDNY capital panel and has frequently been found learned in the law of capital cases. That means a death penalty case. In arriving at the recommendation, I have contacted the government and defense counsel and have reviewed the conflict list. Mr. Moskowitz is available and does not appear to have any conflict. Now, that's really interesting because Mangione could face the death penalty if he's found guilty of killing Thompson at that federal level. And the court would want a defense attorney who is well versed in capital punishment and the changes that it can bring to a case. Moskowitz has experience. He served as the assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York, where this case is being held, from 1985 to 1991. He's now a founding partner at his own law firm. And by the way, that law firm behind the Agnifilos released a statement when Moskowitz was appointed, saying the Agnifilo in-trader team is pleased to have Avi Moskowitz lend his considerable expertise in death penalty cases to Mr. Mangione's federal case as learned counsel. The charges could not be more serious, and our client needs every resource at his disposal to fight these unprecedented charges in 3 jurisdictions. So what about that third jurisdiction? One state over in Pennsylvania? Well, a court appearance was scheduled for next week, and Mangione was supposed to attend virtually, but the court docket now shows that the appearance has been canceled, and there's nothing else scheduled at this time. Officers in Altoona say that when they were called to the McDonald's, Mangione was sitting at a table looking at a laptop with a backpack on the floor beside him. The arrest report reads, Co-Affian asked the male to pull down his medical mask so he could see his face. The male complied and pulled down his mask. Affian and Co-Affian immediately recognized him as the suspect from New York City incident after seeing photos released of him from media sources. Co-Affian asked the male for identification and provided officers a New Jersey driver's license bearing the name Mark Rosario and a date of birth of 7/21/1988. Affian took the license, ran the information through the dispatch center. Co-Affian asked the male if he had been to New York recently, and the male became quiet and started to shake. During a search of the defendant's backpack, officers located a black 3D printed pistol and a black silencer. The pistol had a metal slide with a plastic handle and a metal threaded barrel. The pistol had 1 loaded Glock magazine with 6 9mm full metal jacket rounds. There was also 1 Look 9mm hollow point round. The silencer was also 3D printed. And that kind of gives you some insight into the 5 charges that Mangione faces out in PA. So we have forgery, carrying a firearm without a license, tampering with identification, possessing instruments of a crime, and providing false identification to law enforcement authorities. Now, Mangione's legal team apparently launched a website to aggregate everything that people might want to know about the case, and at the top it reads, due to the extraordinary volume of inquiries and outpouring of support, this site was created and is maintained by Luigi Mangione's New York legal defense team to provide answers to frequently asked questions, accurate information about his cases, and dispel misinformation. The intent is to share factual information regarding the unprecedented multiple prosecutions against him. And And underneath that, Mangione himself provided a statement which reads, "I am overwhelmed by and grateful for everyone who has written me to share their stories and express their support. Powerfully, this support has transcended political, racial, and even class divisions as mail has flooded MDC from across the country and around the globe. While it is impossible for me to reply to most letters, please know that I read every one that I receive. Thank you again to everyone who took the time to write. I look forward to hearing more in the future." And the website also includes a frequently asked questions section, which addresses things like what can be sent to Mangione while he's locked up. And under the question, "May I send him items like books?" the answer reads, "Due to the overwhelming generosity of the members of the public, numerous books have already been mailed to Luigi. He is very appreciative, but kindly asks that people temporarily refrain from sending more books. The number of books he can possess at any given time is limited." And another frequently asked question is apparently whether people can send photos to Mangione while he's behind bars. The site clarifies that yes, he can be sent photos in accordance with BOP, Bureau of Prisons, mail procedures, but also warns, please note that every photo that is received is screened and reviewed by law enforcement. So just taking note about what those photos might be. At the bottom of the site's homepage is something that has been quite controversial. It is a link to a legal fund through the crowdfunding site Give, Send, Go. And according to the apparent organizers of the campaign, who call themselves the December 4th Legal Committee, they say they've increased their goal to $1 million, saying, "We do not think this is ambitious, but rather appropriate." Now, here's the thing about that. Law&Crime correspondent Chris Stewart spoke with Sam Beard, one of the organizers of the fundraising effort, about the recent report that more than $300,000 had been raised and offered to Mangione's defense team.
To clarify what that actually meant is we had spent a while trying to get in contact with his team, and naturally they're very busy, and Luigi himself is a hard cat to get a hold of. And we got word from his lead legal defense attorney that he was aware of the fund and was indeed ready to accept it. So that announcement was sort of actually just saying we had made that preliminary contact, and his team, he and his legal team have decided to accept the funds. And then we've got this sort of like actual technological transfer of the funds from one account to another. And that's an ongoing process.
According to the fundraising site, the amount raised recently broke $500,000. Along with the link to the fundraiser, the website states, "Please note that by choosing to donate money to his legal defense, you acknowledge that it does not give you any right or access to information or materials regarding the cases, nor will you be able to dictate how any donated monies are spent." And Chris Stewart asked Sam Beard about the ethical implications of showing support for somebody who allegedly committed murder. And if that wasn't interesting enough to hear what he has to say, Beard's cat also made an appearance during the interview too. Take a look.
It's brought up some really important questions about morality, about ethics, about the nature of our system. But at the end of the day, when you have an unjust system that degrades human life, someone is going to be the target of that anger. And it's either going to be the people who benefit from that system or the people who suffer the most under it, who are going to be scapegoated. I think at the end of the day, what the outpouring of support has revealed is that millions of hardworking Americans know that the people who are actually destroying this country don't arrive by migrant caravan. They arrive by limousine and private jet, wearing $10,000 suits and work on the top floor executive suites of fancy glass-clad skyscrapers on Wall Street. And I think at the end of the day, everybody knows this version of America is unsustainable. And the question has sort of emerged is, will people band together to bring dignity, liberty, and justice for all, or will things just continue to get worse?
But and again, innocent until proven guilty, is murder the path to getting that change?
You know, at the end of the day, standing up to the kings who think they own this country is as American as apple pie. People aren't celebrating murder, but they understand that Luigi's alleged, oh my goodness, Kitty, Luigi's alleged actions have changed the conversation back to where it really belongs, right? A conversation about all of us, about a plurality of hardworking Americans who work longer, harder than any generation that's come before us. And we're sort of at this reckoning in the American story where we're like, what direction are we going to go? And when it's like, the question of morality and the question of ethics, it comes up a lot. And I think it's a really, really important question. But, at the end of the day, we live in a world saturated with violence, right? We've got AI algorithms run by the largest private health insurance corporation in the world that sort of systematically denies people life-saving medical care in order to return value to the shareholders. And it's like a deeply corrupt and creepy and frankly bizarre system that is out of touch with what Americans need and what they deserve.
Because I wonder, even with the death of Brian Thompson and how shocking it was, I'm sure, for not just his family, but his coworkers and people who do that work, whether we agree on the healthcare system and all of that, of what change could all of this even bring to a system? Does the system even look at losing a life as something that's going to be much of a difference when it comes to denying these claims, which, according to the evidence that's been laid forward, was the motivation for what Mangione is accused of doing?
Now, before the hearing today, I actually had the opportunity to sit down with litigator Rich Schoenstein about the different legal aspects surrounding these cases. Take a listen. Rich, so good to see you. Thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. So I first want to start off with, I don't think I got a chance to ask you about this, about the state case, the state charges, because do you think the first-degree murder and one of the second-degree murder charges actually applies here? Let me tell you why I say that, because it says the defendant in the county of New York on or about December 4th, 2024, having been more than 18 years old at the time of the commission of the crime, that all makes sense, with intent to cause the death of another person, that makes sense, caused the death of Brian Thompson. When I say it makes sense, I'm saying based on the facts of the case, it makes sense. Not he's still innocent until proven guilty. But then this is the part that I have questions on. And said person was killed in furtherance of an act of terrorism involving a violent act and acts dangerous to human life that were in violation of the criminal laws of this state and were intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policies of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. Does that apply here?
So, really good question. First of all, we know the reason that they have alleged this, because first-degree murder under New York state law is the only way you can get a sentence of life imprisonment without the opportunity for parole. If it's a second-degree murder, and in New York, intentional killing is only second degree. Some states intentional is first degree, but in New York, it's only second degree.
And by the way, he is charged with that too. He's charged with just straight up second degree murder intent, which I think is probably their easiest charge to actually find him guilty on if this goes to trial. But it's the first degree and this other second degree that I'm asking about. Yeah.
So the prosecutors want to be able to seek life imprisonment in prison without chance of parole. So they have upped this with this terrorism enhancement. Now, does it fit what you just read? Does it fit the words? Well, here's how I analyze it. So, assuming the allegations are correct, and of course, as you say, they have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury, all of that. He killed a person who he didn't have any personal experience or beef with. He did it purposefully, and he did it to send a message, right? Do you agree with all that so far?
Yeah, I would agree with that based on what's been laid out so far.
Right, to send a message about the insurance industry. So wasn't that arguably an act to intimidate others, to terrorize people in that industry, to make them feel in danger, to influence them? I don't buy you.
Well, let me ask you, is a civilian population other executives at insurance companies?
Sure, they're civilians. Listen, I don't see how it gets you to influencing the government. There's parts of that about influencing the government to do something. That doesn't seem applicable. But if he did what is alleged, he did it on purpose to scare people and send a message. And I think that a jury, like a jury that's going to decide, a jury could determine that that was a terrorist act. I don't think it's an overcharge, but it's much harder to prove than the second degree case.
I think there is so much room for a defense attorney to rip this apart. I mean, like a classic example, right? Somebody blows up a bus. Somebody goes on a shooting spree, kills people in a crowded area. You know, this is the idea of a terrorist attack meant to scare the population. I get it. Look how we felt after 9/11. I get it. This one just felt like, and let me be clear, if the allegations are true, sure, he is a danger to society, but there was no indication that he was going out and trying to kill random people. And if you look at the tape, the surveillance footage from outside that hotel, there was a bystander there. There was a witness and didn't even recognize that, didn't even go near that person, didn't even aim the weapon at that person. And so because it seems so targeted, do we say that assassins or alleged assassins who have a specific target, they can always, be charged with terrorism? I mean, again, that's the part where it feels tricky to me.
Well, what if what if he hadn't been caught? And now there's a guy out there who has killed a CEO of a healthcare company. We don't know anything about that except it appears to be a beef with the insurance industry. Aren't other insurance executives now terrified? Aren't they, or don't they feel at risk? Hasn't he sent a message to them? Isn't that what he intended? Part of my problem with this guy, if the allegations are true, is that he's highly educated. If he had things to say about insurance, and there are a lot of things that can be said about the insurance in this country, he could have found a viable way to say them and express them and share them. Shooting a guy in the back wasn't an articulate way to say his point.
Let me ask you this, from a legal point of view, the public outpouring of support that he has received, could prosecutors say, there you go, he got what he wanted, people feel differently, people feel energized after what Luigi Mangione is accused of doing. It worked, this act, this killing, and I'll get to a minute because Mangione himself has actually addressed his supporters. We'll get to that in a second. But the outpouring of support, is that something that could help prosecutors?
Okay, so I have a different feeling about this outpouring of support. I want to say two things about it. First of all, we've seen this all through history. Jesse James had fans, Bonnie and Clyde had fans, Al Capone had fans. So there's nothing new about that. Secondly, is this an outpouring or just a bunch of nitwits on the internet? Have we seen one person of any consequence put their name to it and go on a TV show and say what this guy did is good and righteous and he should be congratulated? Has a single real person taken that position? I don't see. I haven't seen it. Have you?
There are certain journalists who have been taking some creative liberties regarding this. And by the way, he received over $500,000 in his legal defense fund. There was just reported that somebody put forward $11,000, one anonymous donor. That's real money. That's real support.
Yeah, I've heard that too. That's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. I mean,
really? Really?
Listen, I'm surprised it's that much, right? I'm surprised that many people gave money to an Ivy League educated rich guy who is accused of murder. Like, he doesn't need the money. He's got a family, or he could get a public defender if he doesn't have the resources. So giving him money for his legal defense is garbage. I don't know. What can
he use that $500,000 for? I mean, it's got to help with his legal fees. He's hired some high-powered attorneys.
So it's an interesting thing. I don't know enough about like this site that's taking these contributions. I don't know what that site says about what the money can be used for. But my caution to the public, whenever they're contributing to somebody's legal defense, would be the redefined print, because I'm not sure he's under any restriction to use that for his legal defense.
Let me ask you this. So his team apparently started a website, seemingly from his lawyers, and it's luigimangioneinfo.com. When you go on there, it lists information about the case, but one of the things you get is a statement from the defendant himself. And the statement is, I am overwhelmed by and grateful for everyone who has written me to share their stories and express their support. Powerfully, this support has transcended political, racial, and even class divisions as mail has flooded MDC from across the country and around the globe. That's the Metropolitan Detention Center where he's currently locked up. While it's impossible for me to reply to most letters, please know that I read every one that I receive. Thank you again to everyone who took the time to write. I look forward to hearing more in the future. 2 questions for you. Go back. 1, that statement, could that be used against him? And number 2, the idea that if this was his legal team who created this website, what's the strategy there?
Okay, so the answer to your first question is any statement he makes publicly could theoretically be introduced as evidence at trial. Like, he has a right not to testify, but if he makes a public statement or a recorded statement, in theory, they could try to introduce that. I didn't find anything in that statement that was incriminating. I'm not sure why a prosecutor would want to use that statement.
Well, again, this is a guy who, if you believe, committed an act of murder to intimidate or influence a civilian population, wanted to make some sort of change. It could potentially be he's talking about the support he received. Maybe it goes into that idea.
I guess. I mean, going to the second, I don't know. I mean, that's like, if he has support, then I suppose someone could argue he didn't create terror. He created a kumbaya moment for everybody who's mad at the insurance industry. I guess.
Or you go back to what you say. It's there to intimidate a civilian population of CEOs and executives and high-ranking officials at insurance companies.
I think the strategy of having that website could be 2 things. 1, it could genuinely be a fundraising effort for the defense, but also to just put out some information into the public space, right? We're all potential jurors for this matter, or you and I are. We both live in New York City. We're in the jury pool. So put out some information about the case from his perspective and try to make sure there's not an avalanche of assumption of his guilt heading into his trial.
Could that improperly affect a potential jury pool? Could prosecutors look at this, object to it, and say, this is going to taint the case?
Well, you're going to ask every juror, the judge or the parties, have you heard about the case? But then every juror will be asked the ultimate question. Have you formed an opinion about guilt or innocence? Are you able to come to this trial and put any opinions to your side and render a just verdict based on the evidence and the instructions the judge, give you? And they're going to vet every prospective juror. It's going to be pretty hard to be in that jury pool and not have heard about this case. I always think, as a trial lawyer, I'm not sure I would want a juror who had never heard about this case. Like, where has that person been living? I'm not, but I do want a juror who's going to put aside whatever they have heard to consider the evidence and render a just verdict.
Let me ask you this. Let me talk to you about the federal case. I say that there's been a criminal complaint, but there's been no indictment. Why has there been no federal indictment at the time of this recording as of yet?
I don't know. Now, I assume, right, these law enforcement agencies usually coordinate. And when there's an ongoing state and an ongoing federal prosecution, they will discuss, who goes first. And I was kind of surprised because, I think the federal charges might have come out in this case even before the state charges in the first instance. But now it seems like the state case is moving ahead. I don't know why that is. Also, I don't know if the change of administration has at all affected the federal charges. I mean, we know it's affected some of the cases in the office of the Southern District of New York. I don't know if it's affected this case.
Do you think the federal murder charge applies? I talked about the state. Let me lay this out for the federal one, because for the federal murder charge, it says on or about December 4th, 2024 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Luigi Nicholas Mangione, the defendant, during and in relation to crimes of violence for which he may be prosecuted in a court of the United States, namely the stalking offenses charged in counts 1 and 2 of this complaint. And this is what's important. So my understanding is this has to now be a murder done in connection with stalking, and he's charged separately with stalking. But when you look at what stalking is, in this criminal complaint, it says stalking is when you place a person in reasonable fear of the death of and serious bodily injury to that person, and in the course of engaging in such conduct, cause the death of that person. Now, I spoke with Serena Townsend about this, and she opened my eyes to it, so I'm always going to give her credit for it. She was basically of the opinion, how could you charge him with this? How could you say this is stalking? Did Brian Thompson know that he was being stalked? Don't you, if you're going to have to put reasonable fear of death or serious bodily injury into the mind of Brian Thompson, unless I'm reading it the wrong way, how on earth is this stalking?
Yeah, I think that's an argument that'll come out if the federal case proceeds. Look, again, obviously the reason there's a federal case is because in the federal case, you have the possibility of the death penalty. So you've gone from, in the state case, we've increased the charges to try to get life imprisonment without parole, and there's a federal case to get the possibility of the death penalty. And so they've had to go through that stalking route to come up with a federal murder case. And it's a little tenuous, like the terrorism stuff, which I concede is a little tenuous. I mean, the facts of the case would seem to indicate intentional, premeditated murder, and whatever the consequences of that are. It does seem like in the common vernacular of stalking, it does seem like he stalked the guy. He knew where he was going to be at 6 o'clock in the morning and found him outside of a hotel. Like he must have had information about his schedule. I think there is an element of stalking there, but I take your point that the victim wasn't necessarily aware of that. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, again, credit to Serena Townsend on that. Let me ask you about the death penalty. Do you think that prosecutors are going to officially pursue the death penalty against him, particularly after this came forward, President Donald Trump's executive order, because apparently he had ordered the Attorney General to move forward with the death penalty, quote, for all crimes of a severity demanding its use. Do you think that this crime would fall under that?
To me, it would. I mean, if I just listen to the words you just read, I mean, this is a premeditated, intentional act of murder, shot a guy in the back and killed him. And the question is ultimately for the jury of whether or not it meets the kind of stalking allegations that have to be included in the federal claim. But if a jury determines that it does and he's convicted, to me, it would qualify for the death penalty. And while I am aware that the new administration is interested in enforcing the death penalty in federal cases as a general matter, what I don't know is what their view is of this particular case. Right? Do you know what the new president's view of this particular case is?
Me personally, no, I don't.
Yeah, so I don't know if they're going to step on the gas for the death penalty here, even though if you take their words just at face value, you would say, well, this seems to be one of these cases. I would think they would.
And here's the thing about it. You know, on one hand, they say, look, this is a case that transcends others because of the impact that it's had. We don't want copycats. We don't want people following it. And yet, if he's convicted and he's sentenced to death, the concern would be, is he a martyr? Is he going to be seen as a martyr? There was a free Luigi billboard, just reported by TMZ, a free Luigi billboard plastered in New York City ahead of his court hearing. You know, you look at this and you wonder, if you pursue the death penalty against him, could that embolden what's happening?
Yeah, I get, but you can always think about that when you're prosecuting people. I mean, I think we have to approach this by enforcing the laws as they are written and prosecuting the people who appear to have violated the law. And you know me, what I very much believe in, letting the jury decide if a person is guilty or not. And then you get to the penalty stage and you have to deal with that. And I could see I could see him getting convicted and someone determining this isn't an appropriate case for the death penalty for this, that, or the other reason. It's a single victim case. It's a youngish defendant. So it's not a case that sings out death penalty like some of the other cases you and I have looked at over the past few years. So I don't know how it would come out, but the laws are there. The prosecutors should prosecute, the jury should decide, the judges should impose sentences.
We shall see. Rich Schoenstein, great seeing you. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
And there you have it, everybody. Some updates in the Luigi Mangione case. We will continue to follow this one for you here on Sidebar, but right now that's all we have for you. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.